Don't touch my bride, I'll be back tomorrow. He left her in a millionaire's mansion. What happened next, you can never imagine a man doing to a new bride. A great story with a great ending. Hi, my beautiful family. May the Almighty cover you in his endless mercy, filling your mornings with light, your nights with peace, and your hearts with a love so pure it overflows into every soul you meet. May every challenge you face turn into a crown of strength, every tear into a fountain of joy, and may his angels walk beside you in every step you take. Amen. If you're here with me now, please comment, present. If you feel our unshakable bond, comment, I am with Mr. Peter. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for your love and faith, and to my precious family members here for the first time, welcome to your home. Trust your storyteller and brother. Don't leave now. Stay till the very last second because I promise every moment will touch your heart. Don't forget to like and subscribe because every single like and comment is a heartbeat that keeps this beautiful family alive. The chandelier cast diamonds of light across Zendaya Juliet's wedding ring as Lambert Bean released her hand at the mahogany dinner table, his fingers already reaching for the phone that would destroy everything. You look beautiful tonight, Lambert murmured, but his grey eyes weren't on his wife. They kept darting to that phone, face down beside his plate, vibrating against the wood like a rattlesnake's warning. Zendaya smoothed her emerald dress, the one Lambert had insisted she wear, the one that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She'd spent 2 hours on her hair, creating an elegant crown of braids that her grandmother would have called royalty-worthy. Lambert had barely glanced up when she'd emerged from their bedroom, transformed. He'd been too busy texting. Charles Lincoln entered the dining room with the quiet authority of a man who'd built an empire from nothing. At 42, he carried himself with the confidence that came from earning every dollar, not inheriting it. His salt and pepper hair caught the light as he smiled warmly at his guests, though Zendaya noticed how his blue eyes lingered on her with something close to concern. "Mrs. Bean, you grace my home," Charles said, taking her hand gently. His touch was warm, respectful, so different from Lambert's increasingly cold fingers. "Lambert, you're a fortunate man." "The fortunate one is whoever gets to do business with you, Charles," Lambert replied, his salesman's smile stretching too wide. "This deal will change everything for us." Zendaya had heard about this deal for 3 months. Lambert spoke of it in reverent whispers, like a prayer to the god of money. He'd told her that Charles Lincoln could make them rich beyond their dreams, that after tonight they'd never worry about bills again. She'd believed him. She'd believed everything he told her since the day he'd walked into her father's church in Georgia, looking like answered prayers in a 3-piece suit. "Shall we eat first?" Charles suggested, gesturing to the elaborate spread his staff had prepared. "Business goes down better with good food." The housekeeper, a dignified woman with silver hair pulled into a perfect bun, appeared as if summoned by thought. "Mr. Lincoln, the braised lamb is ready." "Thank you, Cordelia," Charles said warmly. "Cordelia Westbrook has been with my family for 20 years. She's the real reason this house runs so smoothly." Cordelia's eyes crinkled as she smiled at Zendaya. "It's lovely to have a young woman in the house again. It's been too quiet since—" She caught herself glancing at Charles. "Since my wife passed," Charles finished quietly. 5 years now." An uncomfortable silence fell. Lambert's phone buzzed again. This time he grabbed it. "I'm so sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "I need to take this. Major client emergency." Zendaya felt her stomach drop. Not tonight. He'd promised. No work calls during their first dinner with Charles Lincoln. She'd begged him to leave the phone in the car. "Of course," Charles said graciously, though his eyes narrowed slightly. Lambert stood, already walking away, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, I understand. 20 minutes. I can be there in 15. Lambert. Zendaya's voice came out smaller than she intended. He returned to the table, his face a masterpiece of fake regret. Baby, I'm so sorry. The Morrison acquisition is falling apart. If I don't get there now, we lose everything we've worked for. He grabbed his coat from the back of his chair, already checking his phone for messages that didn't exist. Charles, I'm mortified. But Zendaya can represent both of us. She knows the business as well as I do. That was a lie. Lambert had never let her near the business, always saying numbers would confuse her pretty head. She'd been a mathematics teacher before they married, but he'd convinced her to quit, said his wife shouldn't have to work. Surely it can wait until after dinner, Charles suggested, his tone mild but firm. I wish it could. Lambert was already backing toward the door. I'll be back in an hour, 2 at most. Zendaya, baby, order whatever you want. Charles, we'll reschedule the business talk. I promise. He kissed her forehead, a nothing kiss, like blessing a child, and was gone before she could protest. The sound of his BMW roaring to life and speeding away seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Zendaya sat frozen, her hands folded in her lap, shame burning her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Mr. Lincoln. This is incredibly rude. I should go. You'll do no such thing, Charles said firmly but kindly. Cordelia has prepared an incredible meal, and it would be a shame to waste it. Besides, I could use the company. This house gets lonely. She looked up at him, surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. But the business discussion can wait. To be honest, Mrs. Bean. Zendaya, please. Zendaya. He said her name like it was something precious. To be honest, I was more interested in getting to know the woman Lambert spoke so highly of than discussing another investment opportunity. He speaks highly of me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Charles paused, choosing his words carefully. He mentioned you were from Georgia, that your father is a minister. Was, Zendaya corrected softly. Daddy passed 2 years ago. Heart attack during Sunday service. He died doing what he loved, Mama says. I'm sorry for your loss. It's how I met Lambert, actually. He came to the funeral, said he was passing through town, felt called to stop at our church. She smiled ruefully. Mama thought he was an angel sent by Daddy. Cordelia served the lamb, moving with practiced grace. The meat was perfect, but Zendaya could barely taste it. She kept glancing at the door, waiting for Lambert's return. How long have you been married? Charles asked. 18 months. She twisted her wedding ring, a simple band, nothing like the elaborate diamonds the other executives' wives wore at Lambert's company parties. We got married 3 months after we met. Mama said it was too fast, but Lambert was so sure. He said, when you know, you know. And did you know? The question hung in the air. Zendaya set down her fork. I thought I did. He was different from the men in our small town. Sophisticated. He talked about art and travel and all the places he'd take me. She laughed, but it was hollow. We've been to exactly one place, here, to your house. An hour passed, then 2. Charles kept the conversation flowing, asking about her childhood in Georgia, her love of gardening inherited from her grandmother, her dreams of opening a community center for at-risk youth. He listened, really listened, in a way Lambert never had. It's getting late, Zendaya finally said, checking her phone for the 100th time. No messages, no missed calls. I should call a taxi. Nonsense. You can't go home alone at this hour. We have several guest rooms. You're welcome to stay until Lambert returns. I couldn't impose. It's not an imposition. Charles stood, and she noticed how tired he looked. Cordelia will show you to a room. I'm sure Lambert will be back soon with a perfectly reasonable explanation. But as Cordelia led her up the grand staircase, past oil paintings of Charles's ancestors and photographs of a beautiful woman who must have been his late wife, Zendaya felt something cold settle in her stomach. Lambert's cologne lingered in the hallway, but she realized with startling clarity that she couldn't remember the last time he'd held her, really held her, the way a husband should hold his wife. The guest room was larger than their entire apartment. Cordelia had laid out toiletries and a silk nightgown that looked like it had never been worn. "This was Mrs. Isabel's," Cordelia said softly. "Mr. Charles keeps her things for donation, but never seems to get around to it. She would want someone to use them." "What was she like?" Zendaya asked. Cordelia's face softened. "Kind, genuine. She had a way of making everyone feel seen. Mr. Charles hasn't been the same since she passed. Tonight's the first time I've seen him really smile in months." After Cordelia left, Zendaya sat by the window, still in her emerald dress, watching the driveway. Every sweep of headlights made her heart jump, but none of them turned into the estate. At 3 in the morning, she finally called Lambert. Straight to voicemail. She called again. And again. On the 10th try, a mechanical voice informed her the number was no longer in service. Her hands shaking, she called their apartment landline. A stranger answered. "Hello? Who is this?" the woman asked. "I'm looking for Lambert Bean. This is his wife." A pause. "Lady, I don't know any Lambert. I just moved in today. The previous tenant cleared out this morning, left the place empty except for some women's clothes in the closet." The phone slipped from Zendaya's numb fingers. Outside, the moon hung full and bright, illuminating the sprawling gardens below. Somewhere in the house a clock chimed, marking another hour of Lambert's absence. She didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she stood at that window, still in her emerald dress, watching the empty driveway and trying to understand how a man could vanish as completely as morning mist. The wedding ring on her finger caught the moonlight, sending fractured rainbows across the wall. Beautiful, broken things that disappeared the moment she moved her hand. In the distance, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Charles, unable to sleep, pausing outside her door as if wanting to knock, to offer comfort. But he moved on, respecting her privacy, leaving her to hold vigil for a man who was already becoming a ghost. The first bird began to sing just before dawn, and still, Zendaya stood at the window, waiting for a car that would never come. Chapter 2. The Unraveling Truth. 7 sunrises had painted Zendaya's borrowed room gold, and still she wore the emerald dress like armor against the truth she wasn't ready to face. Cordelia knocked softly, entering with a breakfast tray that would remain untouched like the 6 before it. The older woman's eyes held the gentle concern of someone who'd witnessed heartbreak before. "Child, you need to eat something," Cordelia said, setting the tray on the bedside table. "Starving yourself won't bring him back." "I'm not hungry." Zendaya's voice was hoarse from crying she only did when she thought no one could hear. "Has Mr. Lincoln... He's been making calls all morning. He's determined to find your husband." Husband. The word felt like swallowing glass. What kind of husband abandons his wife at a stranger's house? What kind of husband disconnects his phone and empties their apartment while she sits at a dinner meant to change their lives? A knock at the door interrupted her spiral. Charles stood in the hallway, looking uncomfortable but determined. He'd clearly been up all night. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled. "May I come in?" Zendaya nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look. 7 days in the same dress, hair undone from its careful braids, makeup long since cried away. "I've had my security team check your apartment," Charles said gently. "The landlord confirmed Lambert cleared everything out the morning you came here. He'd given notice a month ago." A month ago. When he'd been promising her they'd buy a house soon. When he'd been showing her pictures of homes in better neighborhoods, asking which kitchen she'd prefer for all the dinners they'd host. "That's not possible," she whispered. Charles pulled a chair close to where she sat by the window. Not too close, maintaining respectful distance, but close enough that she could see the genuine concern in his eyes. "There's more. The business deal he mentioned? I never discussed any deal with him. He called my office, insisted on this dinner, said it was urgent. I agreed because—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "Because he mentioned you. Said his wife was special, that you'd grown up in Georgia, that your father was a minister. My Isabel was from Georgia too. Her father was also a minister. I thought it might be Providence. So there was never any deal?" Zendaya's world tilted further off its axis. "Then why—" "I don't know yet, but I intend to find out." She stood abruptly, the room spinning slightly from lack of food. "I should go. I've imposed enough." "Go where?" Charles asked gently. "Your apartment is rented to someone else. Do you have family nearby?" "My mama's in Georgia, but I can't go home like this. I can't face her questions, not yet." "Then you'll stay here until you're ready. This house has 12 bedrooms. You're not imposing." "Why?" the question burst out of her. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Charles was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the gardens below. "When Isabel was dying, she made me promise something. She said the universe would send me people who needed help, and that helping them would help me heal. I've been waiting 5 years for the universe to send someone." He looked at her directly. "I think you might be that someone." Tears she thought she'd exhausted found new life. "I don't even know who I am without him. Mrs. Bean doesn't exist if there's no Mr. Bean." "Then maybe," Charles said softly, "it's time to remember who Zendaya Juliet is." That afternoon, Cordelia convinced her to finally change clothes, bringing a selection from storage. "These were for donation," she explained. "Mr. Charles can't seem to let them go, but I know Isabel would want them used." The clothes fit perfectly. Simple, elegant pieces that made Zendaya feel like herself for the first time in months. She'd been wearing what Lambert chose for so long, she'd forgotten her own taste. In the mirror, she saw someone she almost recognized. Her father's strong jaw, her mother's expressive eyes, the gap between her front teeth that Lambert had wanted her to fix but she'd refused because her grandmother had the same gap and called it lucky. Downstairs, she found Charles in his study, surrounded by papers and making calls. He looked up when she entered, and something flickered in his eyes. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition. Like he was seeing her for the first time. "My investigator will be here soon," he said. "Theodore Blackstone. He's the best in the business. Discreet, thorough." "I don't have money to pay." "I'm not asking for payment. I'm asking for answers. A man doesn't just vanish without reason." Theodore Blackstone arrived an hour later, a tall, imposing man with skin dark as midnight and eyes that missed nothing. He sat across from Zendaya, notebook ready, voice gentle despite his intimidating presence. "Tell me about your marriage, Mrs. Bean. Start from the beginning." So she did. How Lambert had appeared at her father's funeral like an answered prayer. How he'd courted her with flowers and poetry, with promises of adventure and a life bigger than the small town she'd known. How he'd insisted on a quick wedding, saying waiting was for people who weren't sure. Did he ever mention family, friends, previous relationships? His parents died in a car accident when he was young, no siblings. He said I was all the family he needed. The words sounded so hollow now. Theodore made notes, his face revealing nothing. What about money? Joint accounts? He handled all that. Said it was easier, that I shouldn't worry about bills and numbers. She felt foolish saying it out loud. Her father had raised her to be independent, but Lambert had made dependence seem like love. "I'll need a few days," Theodore said, standing. "But I'll find him. Men like this always leave trails." That evening, Zendaya ventured into the kitchen for the first time. Cordelia was making soup, the kitchen warm and inviting. "Can I help?" Zendaya asked. "Can you chop vegetables?" My grandmother taught me to cook before I could write my name properly. They worked in comfortable silence, the rhythmic chopping soothing. Charles appeared in the doorway looking surprised. "She's a natural," Cordelia told him. "Better knife skills than you." "That's not saying much," Charles laughed, and it transformed his face. "I once tried to make Isabel breakfast and nearly burned down the kitchen." "She must have loved you very much to eat your cooking," Zendaya said, then worried she'd overstepped. But Charles smiled. "She did. She ate every burnt egg, every ruined pancake, said it tasted like love." They ate soup together at the kitchen island, not the formal dining room. Charles told stories about Isabel, how they'd met at a charity auction, how she'd outbid him on a painting just to get his attention, how she'd made him donate it to a museum anyway because art belongs to everyone. "She sounds wonderful," Zendaya said. "She was. But so are you." The words hung in the air. Charles looked surprised he'd said them. "I should go," he said quickly. "Early meeting tomorrow." After he left, Cordelia squeezed Zendaya's shoulder. "He hasn't talked about Isabel like that in years. You're good for him." "I'm married," Zendaya said quietly, "to a man who abandoned you. That's not a marriage, child. That's a prison with no walls." That night, Zendaya found Lambert's wedding ring in the guest bathroom, fallen behind the toilet. He must have taken it off while washing his hands that night, already planning his escape. She held the gold band up to the light, reading the inscription she'd had engraved. "Forever and always." The ring was real. The promise was not. She opened the window and threw the ring into the garden below, watching it disappear into the darkness like every promise he'd made. Somewhere in the house, she heard Charles playing piano, a sad, beautiful melody that seemed to understand everything she couldn't say. The notes floated up through her window, wrapping around her like an embrace she didn't know she needed. Her phone, silent for 7 days, suddenly buzzed. Unknown number. "Stop looking for me." Lambert's voice was cold, unrecognizable, not the warm tenor that had promised forever, but something sharp and dismissive. "You were a mistake. The marriage wasn't legal anyway. Be grateful I left you somewhere safe instead of on the street." The line went dead. Zendaya stared at the phone, then at her wedding ring, its diamond catching the light like a tiny star about to burn out. The marriage wasn't legal anyway. What did that mean? How could their vows, witnessed by 50 people in her father's church, not be legal? She walked to Charles's music room, drawn by the piano. He stopped playing when he saw her, taking in her tear-stained face. "He called," she said simply. "He said our marriage wasn't legal." Charles stood, crossing to her carefully. "Then we'll find out what he meant. Theodore will uncover everything." "What if I don't like what he finds?" "Then you'll face it with truth instead of lies. That's already better than what you had." She nodded, wrapping her arms around herself. Charles reached out, then stopped, uncertain. "You can," she whispered. I need someone to tell me I'm real, that I'm not disappearing too." He embraced her carefully, like she might shatter. She didn't shatter. For the first time in 7 days, she felt solid, present, real. His cologne was different from Lambert's, wood and leather instead of synthetic musk. His arms were stronger, his hold more certain. "You're real," he murmured into her hair. "You're real, and you're here, and you're going to survive this." She believed him. Standing in his music room, in borrowed clothes, with her wedding ring somewhere in the garden and her husband's voice still echoing with cruelty, she believed that somehow she would survive this. Outside, storm clouds gathered, promising rain that would wash the garden clean. Chapter 3. The investigation begins. The morning sickness hit Zendaya like a freight train at dawn, sending her racing to the bathroom while the house still slept in darkness. She gripped the marble sink, her body betraying a secret she'd been denying for 3 weeks. The signs had been there. The fatigue she'd blamed on heartbreak, the nausea she'd attributed to stress, the missed period she'd ignored. But here, retching into a millionaire's toilet while her husband's absence stretched into its 3rd week, denial was no longer a luxury she could afford. "Oh, God," she whispered to her reflection, seeing her mother's eyes staring back at her, wide with recognition. "Not now. Please, not now." But her body had its own timeline, its own truth that didn't care about abandonment or invalid marriages. She did the math with trembling fingers. 7 weeks. She'd been 7 weeks pregnant when Lambert had driven her to this house and vanished, which meant she'd conceived just before that final business trip, the one he'd returned from different, distant, distracted, already planning his escape. A soft knock interrupted her spiral. "Zendaya," Cordelia's voice, concerned. "I heard, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she managed, splashing cold water on her face. "Just something I ate." But when she opened the door, Cordelia's knowing eyes took in everything: the pallor, the protective hand over her stomach, the particular exhaustion that had nothing to do with grief. "How far along?" the older woman asked simply. Zendaya's composure cracked. 6 weeks, maybe 7. "I can't, Cordelia, I can't be pregnant. Not now. Not with him gone." Cordelia guided her to sit on the bed, her movements gentle but sure. "Does Mr. Charles know?" "No one knows. I kept hoping I was wrong." "You need to see a doctor, child. Make sure everything's all right." "I can't. I don't have insurance anymore. Lambert handled all that, and if the marriage wasn't legal, Mr. Charles will arrange it. He'll want to help." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "Please don't tell him. I can't bear his pity. I'm already the abandoned wife living in his guest room. I won't be the abandoned pregnant wife too." Cordelia squeezed her hand. "Your secret's safe with me, but secrets have a way of revealing themselves, especially ones that grow." Downstairs, Charles was already in his study when Theodore Blackstone arrived, carrying a leather folder that looked like it held answers to questions Zendaya wasn't sure she wanted to ask. "I need Mrs. Bean present for this," Theodore said, his deep voice carrying through the house. Zendaya descended the stairs slowly, each step feeling like movement toward a truth that would change everything. Charles stood when she entered, pulling out a chair for her. She noticed he'd moved his own chair closer to hers, not touching, but close enough that she could feel his presence like a shield. Theodore opened his folder with the solemnity of someone delivering a death notice. "Lambert Bean doesn't exist." The words hung in the air like smoke. "What do you mean?" Zendaya's voice sounded far away to her own ears. "The man you married was born Lawrence Bridges. He legally changed his name 5 years ago, just before he married a woman named Scarlett Bridges in Miami. They have 2 children together." The room tilted. Charles's hand found hers, steady and warm, anchoring her to the chair. "He's married?" "He was already married when he—" "Yes, which makes your marriage invalid. In the eyes of the law, you were never Mrs. Bean because Mr. Bean never existed, and Lawrence Bridges was already married." Theodore pulled out photographs. Lambert Lawrence, on a beach, with a blonde woman and 2 small boys. Lambert at a backyard barbecue, flipping burgers like a devoted father. Lambert at another wedding, kissing another bride, wearing the same suit he'd worn to marry Zendaya. "I'm going to be sick," Zendaya whispered. Charles helped her to the bathroom, holding her hair back as her body rejected this truth along with her breakfast. The secret growing inside her seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, a reminder that some consequences couldn't be expelled so easily. When she could stand again, Charles guided her to the garden, thinking fresh air might help. The roses were blooming despite the approaching winter, defiant and beautiful against the odds. "Isabel planted these," he said softly. Said roses that bloom out of season are the strongest ones. They survive because they don't follow anyone else's timeline. How long? Zendaya asked. How long was he living this double life? According to Theodore's research, he's been traveling between families for 3 years. 2 weeks with you, 2 weeks with them. The business trips were home, his real home. She laughed, but it was broken. I was the mistress who didn't know she was a mistress, the other woman who thought she was the only woman. You were a victim of fraud, Charles said firmly. This isn't your fault, isn't it? What kind of woman doesn't know her husband has another family? What kind of fool? The kind who trusts, the kind who loves, the kind who believes in vows. His voice carried the weight of personal experience. When Isabel was diagnosed, I spent months in denial. The signs were there, the weight loss, the fatigue, the bruises that wouldn't heal. But I didn't want to see. Love makes us blind sometimes. It's not foolishness, it's hope. They walked among the roses, Charles telling her about each variety, their names like poetry. Secret garden, distant drums, butterscotch. Zendaya found herself actually listening, grateful for words that weren't about betrayal. I need to call my mother, she said suddenly. She needs to know. Use my study. You'll have privacy there. The call to Grace Juliet was the hardest thing Zendaya had done since arriving at the estate. Baby girl, her mother's voice warm as summer honey. I've been calling. Where are you? Mama, I need to tell you something about Lambert. The story poured out, the abandonment, the investigation, the other family. Through the phone, she could hear her mother's sharp intake of breath, the muffled prayer, the sound of a chair being pulled out to sit. Lord have mercy, Grace whispered. That man sat in your father's church. He ate at our table. He promised before God to honor you. The marriage wasn't legal, Mama. I was never really married at all. You were married in your heart. That's what matters to God. The paper might be invalid, but your faith was real. Your love was real. My love was stupid. Zendaya Juliet, don't you dare. Love is never stupid. Using love to deceive, that's what's stupid. That's on him, not you. Mama, there's something else. Zendaya closed her eyes. I'm pregnant. Silence stretched across the miles between Georgia and this borrowed room where she sat surrounded by another man's life. How far? 6 or 7 weeks. Does he know? Number, and he won't. A man who could do this doesn't deserve to know. Baby girl, you need to come home. Let me take care of you. I can't. Not yet. I'm safe here. The man who owns this house, Charles, he's been kind. His housekeeper is looking after me. I just need time to figure out what comes next. A baby is what comes next, Grace said firmly. That baby didn't ask for a lying father any more than you asked for a lying husband. But that child is still a blessing. After the call, Zendaya sat in Charles's study, surrounded by books and the lingering scent of his cologne. On the desk was a photograph of him with Isabel, both laughing at something beyond the camera's view. Isabel was stunning. Elegant features, warm smile, eyes that held intelligence and mischief in equal measure. You would have known, Zendaya whispered to the photograph. You would have seen through him. Charles found her there an hour later, still staring at the photograph. She was beautiful, Zendaya said. Inside more than out, though she was that too. He sat on the edge of the desk. She would have liked you. You don't know me. I know you've been here 2 weeks and you've thanked Cordelia every time she brings you anything. I know you deadhead the roses when you think no one's watching because you can't bear to see beautiful things neglected. I know you pray before meals even when you're alone. Cordelia's mentioned it. I know you're strong enough to face truth even when it's devastating. How do you know that? Because you're still here, still standing, still fighting to understand instead of running away. That evening, Theodore called with more information. Lambert, Lawrence, had been fired from his job 3 months ago for embezzlement. He'd been stealing from clients, using the money to maintain his double life. The authorities were looking for him. He's a criminal. Zendaya couldn't reconcile this with the man who'd sung hymns beside her in church. White collar, but yes, he owes about $200,000 to various victims. Will they come after me? As his wife, or whatever I was. No, Charles said firmly. The marriage wasn't legal, remember? You have no legal connection to his debts or crimes. You're free. Free. The word should have felt like liberation. Instead, it felt like falling. That night, the morning sickness came again, violent and undeniable. This time Charles heard. She found him waiting outside the bathroom with a glass of ginger tea and a cool washcloth. Cordelia mentioned you weren't feeling well, he said carefully. This helps with nausea. She took the tea with shaking hands. He knew. Of course he knew. The house had no secrets, just kindnesses that pretended not to see. How far along? He asked gently. 6 weeks. Does he know? Number. And I want to keep it that way. Charles nodded slowly. I have an excellent doctor. Discreet. She'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you and the baby are healthy. I can't pay. Zendaya. He said her name like a complete sentence, firm but gentle. Let me help, not from pity, not from obligation, but because Isabel would haunt me forever if I didn't take care of a pregnant woman under my roof. She lost 3 pregnancies herself. She'd never forgive me for not helping you through this. She almost smiled. Using your dead wife to win arguments? She was very persuasive. Death hasn't changed that. They sat in the hallway outside the bathroom, shoulders almost touching, while she sipped the tea and felt the nausea slowly subside. It's his, but it's also mine, she said quietly. This baby didn't choose its father any more than I chose to be deceived. I won't punish it for his sins. That's brave. That's my mama talking. She called the baby a blessing. Mothers usually know. Did you and Isabel want children? We tried for 3 years. The cancer came instead. He was quiet for a moment. She said maybe we were meant to parent differently, through helping others, through leaving the world better than we found it. And have you? Left it better? I'm trying, starting with making sure you and your child are safe. The word hung between them. Your child, not his child, not Lambert's child, but hers. The first person to acknowledge that this baby belonged to her, not to the man who'd abandoned them both before even knowing of its existence. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me as more than his victim, for seeing me as a mother. Charles stood, offering his hand to help her up. You were never just his anything. You're Zendaya Juliet. That's more than enough. As she walked back to her room, Zendaya placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach. Tomorrow, she would see a doctor. Tomorrow, she would make plans. Tomorrow, she would start building a life for 2. But tonight, she simply stood at her window, watching Charles's silhouette in his study below, and wondered how a house of grief had become a place of such unexpected grace. Chapter 4. The Hidden Life. 3 days after learning about Lambert's double life, 3 days of carrying both a baby and the knowledge of its father's betrayal, Zendaya's body made a choice her heart wasn't ready to make. The pain started as whispers in the darkness, gentle warnings her body tried to give before the storm arrived in full force. She woke at 3 in the morning to cramping that stole her breath and sheets stained with the beginning of an ending she'd never wanted. No, she gasped, stumbling from bed. No, please, you're all I have left that's real. But her body had decided that some betrayals run too deep, some stress too heavy for new life to bear. The cramps doubled her over, and she cried out, not loudly, she'd learned to grieve quietly, but enough that footsteps soon hurried down the hallway. Charles appeared in her doorway, taking in the scene with a single glance, the blood, her hunched form, the devastation written across her face. "We need to get you to the hospital," he said, already moving. "It's too late," she whispered. "I can feel it. The baby's already gone." He wrapped her in his coat, his movements efficient but gentle. "We're going anyway. You need medical care." "I don't want to go. I don't want strangers touching me, asking questions, looking at me with pity." "No strangers. I'm calling my personal physician. She'll meet us at her private clinic." He carried her to his car when her legs proved too weak, his arms steady around her shaking form. She buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in his scent of cedar and safety, trying to anchor herself to something solid while everything inside her fell apart. Dr. Elizabeth Lawson met them at the clinic's private entrance, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her manner professional but warm. She examined Zendaya with gentle efficiency while Charles waited outside, pacing the hallway like a caged lion. "I'm sorry, Doctor," Lawson said softly, confirming what Zendaya already knew. "The pregnancy has ended. These things happen sometimes, especially in times of extreme stress. It's not your fault." "Everyone keeps saying that," Zendaya murmured. "Nothing is my fault. Not the abandonment, not the fake marriage, not this. But it's all happening to me, so how can I not be responsible?" "Because responsibility and consequence aren't the same thing. You're experiencing consequences of other people's choices, not punishment for your own." The procedure was quick, clinical, final. Charles never left the waiting room, and when Zendaya emerged, hollow and aching, he was there with a blanket and no questions. The drive back to the estate passed in silence. Zendaya stared out the window at the pre-dawn darkness, one hand pressed to her now empty womb, wondering how much loss one person could hold before they simply dissolved. "I was going to name her Faith," she said suddenly. "I don't know why I thought it was a girl. I just knew. Faith after my grandmother. She would have been beautiful." "She would have been," Charles agreed softly. "With you as her mother, how could she not be?" Back at the house, Cordelia was waiting with hot tea and fresh sheets, her face a map of understood sorrow. She helped Zendaya into bed, tucking blankets around her with maternal care. "You rest now," Cordelia murmured. "The world will still be there when you're ready for it." But Zendaya couldn't rest. She lay awake, watching the sun rise, painting the sky in shades of pink that reminded her of the baby clothes she'd looked at online just yesterday, when hope had still seemed possible. Charles knocked at noon, entering with a tray of soup and crackers. "You need to eat," he said simply. "I'm not hungry." "I know, but your body needs fuel to heal." He sat in the chair beside her bed, not leaving until she'd managed half the soup. Then he did something unexpected. He pulled out a worn leather journal. "These are Isabel's thoughts during her illness," he said. "She wanted them shared with anyone who might need them. I think you might need them now." Zendaya opened the journal to a random page, finding Isabel's elegant handwriting. "Loss is not subtraction, it's transformation. The love doesn't disappear when the object of love does. It changes shape, becomes memory, becomes strength, becomes the capacity to love more deeply because we know how precious and temporary everything is." "She was dying when she wrote that," Charles said quietly. "But she said she'd never felt more alive than when facing loss. It taught her what mattered." What mattered to her? Truth, connection, the courage to remain soft in a world that gives us every reason to harden. He stood to leave, then paused. Theodore called. "He's found more information about Lambert's life in Miami, but it can wait until you're ready." "No," Zendaya said, surprising herself. "I want to know. I need to know everything." Theodore arrived that evening with a laptop full of files. The truth was worse than Zendaya had imagined. Lambert, Lawrence, had 3 children with Scarlett, not 2. He'd been married to her for 5 years, not 3. He had a mortgage, car payments, a country club membership, a whole life built on the foundation of a pharmaceutical sales job that paid well, but not well enough for the lifestyle he was living. "That's why he targeted you," Theodore explained, his voice gentle but direct. "Your father's death meant you'd inherit his life insurance. Lambert knew he'd done his research before showing up at that funeral." "He planned it all?" The room spun slightly. "Our entire relationship was a con. He specialized in vulnerable women. You were his 3rd attempt, but the first one he actually married. The others discovered the truth before it got that far." Charles's jaw tightened. "Have you contacted them?" "The authorities have. They're building a case." Zendaya looked at the photos on Theodore's laptop. Scarlett Bridges was beautiful in that effortless way that spoke of money and ease. Blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold. 3 children who had their father's eyes but their mother's smile. A colonial house with a 2-car garage and a pool. "She doesn't know," Zendaya said suddenly. "Look at her face. She doesn't know what he is." Theodore nodded. "My contacts in Miami say she's been telling friends he's on an extended business trip. She believes he's in Asia setting up new contracts. We have to tell her." Both men looked at Zendaya in surprise. "She's a victim too," Zendaya continued. "She has 3 children with a man who doesn't exist. She deserves the truth." "That's not your responsibility," Charles said. "No, but it's the right thing to do. My father always said the truth might hurt, but lies hurt worse because they steal your ability to make choices. She needs to be able to choose." Theodore promised to reach out to Scarlett through appropriate channels. After he left, Charles and Zendaya sat in the garden, watching the sun set behind the roses. Her body ached from the morning's loss, but her mind felt clearer than it had in weeks. "You're extraordinary," Charles said suddenly. "I'm a woman who lost a baby she barely had time to want, abandoned by a husband who never existed. That's not extraordinary, that's tragic. You're a woman who just lost everything, and your first thought is to protect another woman from the same fate. That's not tragic, that's heroic." She looked at him then. Really looked at him. In the dying light, she could see the threads of silver in his hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and sorrow in equal measure. He was handsome, but not in Lambert's flashy way. Charles's attractiveness came from something deeper, integrity maybe, or the way he held space for other people's pain without trying to fix it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything. How did you keep going?" "After Isabel." Charles was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I didn't at first. For 6 months, I was a ghost, haunting my own life. I worked, I ate, I slept, but I wasn't living. Then one day, I found myself in her garden, this garden, and all her roses were dying from neglect. I realized I was dishonoring her memory by letting beauty die, so I learned to tend roses. It was the first thing I'd done in months that wasn't about loss. But the pain never goes away. It just becomes part of you, like a scar. You learn to carry it. Some days it's heavier than others, but you carry it because the alternative is forgetting, and forgetting would be worse than hurting." A cool breeze stirred the roses, bringing the scent of autumn and endings. Zendaya wrapped her arms around herself, and Charles immediately shrugged off his jacket, draping it over her shoulders. "I should have fought harder," she said, "for the baby. I should have rested more, stressed less." "Stop." His voice was firm but kind. "You did nothing wrong. Sometimes bodies make choices our hearts don't agree with. Isabel lost 3 pregnancies before the cancer. Each time, she blamed herself. But life and death have their own logic that has nothing to do with our actions or intentions." 3? We never told anyone. It felt too private, too raw. But yes, 3 souls that never got to be. She named them anyway: Hope, Grace, and Joy. Said they deserved to be remembered even if they never drew breath. She would have been loved, Charles said quietly. Even if she never drew breath, even if you were the only one who knew she existed, she was loved. That matters. That's her legacy, that she was wanted, even in the midst of chaos. Faith would have liked those names: Hope, Grace, and Joy. They would have been friends, in whatever place souls go when bodies can't hold them, a whole garden of children who were loved but couldn't stay. They sat until full darkness fell, Charles never rushing her, never suggesting they go inside despite the dropping temperature. Finally, Zendaya stood on unsteady legs. I want to do something for her, for Faith, something to mark that she existed. What did you have in mind? My grandmother always said that when someone dies, you plant something in their honor. That way, death feeds life, and the circle continues. Then we'll plant something. What was your grandmother's favorite flower? Gardenias. She said they smelled like heaven's front door. Then we'll plant gardenias. There's a perfect spot near the fountain where they'll get morning sun and afternoon shade. That night, Zendaya found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She wandered the house like a spirit, drawn finally to Charles's study, where a light still burned. He was at his desk, working on what looked like legal documents. Couldn't sleep either? He asked without looking up. Every time I close my eyes, I see her, the daughter I'll never have. She had Lambert's eyes but my smile. Isn't that strange? To miss someone who never existed. Not strange at all. We mourn potential as much as actuality, sometimes more. She moved into the room, drawn to the wall of books. Have you read all of these? Most. Isabel used to say I collected books like some men collect cars, obsessively and with no practical purpose. Reading isn't practical. Not the way I do it. I read to escape, not to learn. What are you escaping? He looked up then, his blue eyes meeting her brown ones. The same thing you are. The knowledge that love doesn't protect us from loss. She pulled a random book from the shelf. Poetry. Mary Oliver. Read to me, she said, surprising them both. I need words that aren't mine, thoughts that aren't about this. So Charles read, his voice deep and steady in the lamplight, while Zendaya curled in the leather chair across from his desk. He read about wild geese and soft animal bodies, about belonging to the world, about announcements of desperation and harsh, exciting calls. Somewhere between one poem and the next, Zendaya fell asleep. Charles covered her with a throw blanket, turned the lamp to its lowest setting, and kept reading silently, standing guard over her rest like a sentinel against the darkness that kept trying to creep in. She woke near dawn to find him still there, asleep in his desk chair, the poetry book open on his chest. His face in sleep looked younger, the careful control relaxed into something more vulnerable. She watched him for a moment. This man who'd taken in a stranger and treated her like precious cargo, who'd held her through loss without asking for anything in return. Moving quietly, she made coffee in the kitchen, bringing him a cup that she set carefully on his desk. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with a soft smile. You stayed all night, she said. You needed to not be alone. Sometimes that's all we can do for each other. Be present. Charles, she paused, searching for words. I don't know how to thank you. For everything. The hospital, the discretion, the space to grieve. You don't thank family for being family. Is that what we are? Family. Chosen family. The kind Isabel believed in. She always said blood makes you related, but choice makes you family. The sunrise painted the study gold, and in that light, Zendaya saw something she hadn't expected. Possibility. Not romantic, not yet. She was too raw for that. but the possibility of rebuilding, of becoming someone new from the ashes of who she'd been. "I want to help find him," she said suddenly. "Lambert, Lawrence, whatever his name is, I want to help catch him." That could be dangerous. So is doing nothing. He's out there, probably targeting another woman. Someone else's daughter, sister, friend. I can't save my baby, but maybe I can save someone else from this pain. Charles studied her for a long moment. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything. He took my trust, my future, my child. I won't let him take my agency too. I want to fight back. Then we fight together." "Why together? This isn't your battle." "It became mine the moment he left you in my house. The moment you became—" He stopped, catching himself. "Became what?" "Important to me," he finished quietly. The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Zendaya didn't respond directly, couldn't yet, but she didn't move away either when he reached across the desk to squeeze her hand. "We'll plant the gardenias today," he said, changing the subject to safer ground. "For Faith." "And then we plan," Zendaya said, steel entering her voice. "We find him, we stop him, and we make sure he never does this to anyone else." Charles nodded, seeing the warrior emerging from the wounded woman. Lambert had made a crucial mistake. He'd assumed abandonment would break her. Instead, it was forging her into something stronger, someone who would not rest until justice was served. Outside, the first birds began their morning songs, and the garden waited for new plantings, for beauty to grow from spaces that had known loss. The gardenias would bloom white and fragrant, and every time the wind carried their scent, Faith would be remembered. But first, there was work to do. Chapter 5. The Revelation. Theodore Blackstone's final report arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like the world ending in slow motion, each page revealing another layer of Lambert's deception. Charles had called Zendaya to his study, his face grave, the leather folder on his desk pulsing with dark energy. She sat across from him, hands folded, braced for impact. "Before I show you this," Charles said carefully, "you can stop any time. You don't have to see all of it." "Yes, I do. Show me everything." The first photograph showed Lambert at a hospital in Miami, holding a newborn while Scarlett smiled from a hospital bed. The date stamp showed 3 days after Zendaya's wedding. "He missed our honeymoon for this," she said numbly. "Said he had a conference in Atlanta." "There's more. Bank statements showing hidden accounts, property deeds for a vacation home in the Keys, school enrollment forms listing him as devoted father and successful entrepreneur. A Christmas photo, all 5 in matching sweaters, the photo Zendaya had begged for, but he'd claimed to hate. "This one is especially relevant," Theodore said, pulling out a document. A life insurance policy. Lambert was beneficiary on $1 million policy on Scarlett's life. He was planning to... Zendaya couldn't finish. "We don't know that," Theodore said quickly. "But the pattern is concerning. Your father's insurance, now this." "How much was I worth?" "Your father's insurance was $300,000. Your grandmother's house, another $200,000. $500,000. That's what my love cost." Charles moved around the desk, crouching beside her chair. "Your love was priceless." His greed had the number. The final document was worst. A wedding announcement from Miami, describing how Lambert and Scarlett met at her father's funeral, where he'd offered comfort during grief. "The same playbook," Zendaya whispered. She stood abruptly, the room spinning. I can't." And then she stopped talking altogether. For 3 days, Zendaya didn't speak. Not to Charles, who brought meals she didn't eat. Not to Cordelia, who sat with her in worried silence. Not to her mother, whose calls went unanswered. She moved through the house like a ghost, standing at windows watching storms roll in. The gardenias for Faith bloomed overnight, their scent funeral sweet. Charles gave her space but never went far. She'd find evidence everywhere, fresh tea appearing when she sat, blankets draped over her shoulders when she dozed, soft piano music drifting from his study when silence grew too heavy. On the third night, she found herself in the library at 2 a.m. That's where she found Isabel's journals, dozens lined up on a shelf marked, "For those who need hope." She pulled one at random, opening to a page marked with a pressed gardenia. Today Charles asked why I'm not angry about dying. How can I explain that anger takes energy I need for loving? Every moment spent raging is a moment stolen from joy. Another journal. Charles thinks I don't know about the baby clothes he hides in the attic. We've lost 3 chances at parenthood, and he mourns alone to spare me. But grief shared is grief halved. And then, in the final journal, dated weeks before Isabel's death, I dreamed of her again. The woman who will love Charles after I'm gone. She's nothing like me, and that's perfect. She's been broken by false love and rebuilt herself with true strength. She knows that love isn't safety from pain. It's having someone to hold your hand through the hurt. She'll teach him that grief and joy can coexist. Charles, if you're reading this, don't wait too long. Don't mistake loyalty to the dead for life. Love again fully. That's not betraying what we had. It's honoring it. Zendaya was crying before she realized it, tears falling onto pages written by a woman who'd faced the ultimate abandonment, not by choice, but by biology, and still believed in love. You're reading her prophecies. Charles's voice from the doorway didn't startle her. She knew about me. Not you specifically, but she believed someone would come. Someone who needed this house as much as it needed them. She wrote that you hide baby clothes in the attic. Charles's face went still. She knew? She knew everything. She loved you enough to let you keep your secrets. He sat on the floor beside her chair. Tell me about your father. The question unlocked something. Joseph Juliet was the strongest man I knew. He could make anyone believe in redemption. You think Lambert was a complicated blessing? Number Lambert was a test. But Faith, she was the blessing, even if I only carried her for weeks. I know. How? Because I've loved 3 souls I never met. Isabel named them, hope, grace, and joy. They existed in the possibility of them. My father would have said something profound about God's plan. What do you say? I say sometimes terrible things happen to good people, and we survive not because of some grand plan, but despite the absence of one. And who is that person? I don't know yet. But she's not the minister's daughter who believed every pretty word. She's someone new, someone forged in fire. Charles reached for Isabel's journal, tracing her handwriting. She would have been proud of you. They sat in silence, surrounded by books and the ghost of a woman whose love still filled the house. Finally, Zendaya spoke again. Theodore found something else, didn't he? Charles hesitated. How did you know? Your face. The same look Daddy got with bad news. Lambert's been in contact with another woman, in Seattle, recently widowed, worth $2 million from her husband's tech company. The words should have hurt, but Zendaya found only exhaustion. We have to warn her. Theodore already has. She didn't believe him, said Lambert, who's going by Logan, would never deceive her. Of course it feels real. He's very good at making lies feel like truth. She'll learn eventually. But maybe not before it's too late. Charles stood, offering his hand. Come with me. He led her to his study, where a laptop showed an email from Patricia Chen in Seattle. You were right. She reached out an hour ago, Charles explained. Wants to know everything. Zendaya read the email, seeing her own story reflected, the sudden departure, the discovered lies, the crushing realization. 3 of us now, she said. 3 women who survived him, Charles corrected. 3 women who can stop him. Zendaya looked at him, this good man who'd opened his home to a stranger's tragedy. Why do you care so much? He brought you here to my house. In a way, he brought you to me. Everything since, your strength, your grace, has shown me something I'd forgotten. What? That life after loss is possible. That Isabel was right about the woman who would teach me to risk again. The words hung heavy with implication. Zendaya turned away. It's too soon, she said quietly. I know, I'm not asking for anything. Just saying that maybe you stayed for the right reasons. She thought of Isabel's journal entry about the woman who would love Charles next. Had Isabel somehow known? We should respond to Patricia, Zendaya said, changing the subject. They spent the next hour crafting a response, building a network of Lambert's victims who would become his downfall. As dawn broke, Zendaya felt something unexpected. Power. The power that comes from truth, from solidarity, from refusing to let cruelty define your capacity for trust. He's going to pay, she said, steel in her voice. Yes, he is. And in that moment, in a study filled with morning light and the ghost of love that transcended death, Zendaya felt herself transforming. Lambert had abandoned her, but in doing so, he delivered her exactly where she needed to be. Chapter 6. The Healing Garden. The roses were dying when Zendaya first took the pruning shears in her hands, their edges brown with neglect, stems growing wild in every direction except toward the sun. Isabel would be heartbroken, Cordelia said, watching from the kitchen window as Zendaya surveyed the garden that had once been the estate's crown jewel. Mr. Charles hasn't touched them since she passed. Can't bear to, but can't bear to hire someone else either. It had been 2 months since Lambert's abandonment, 3 weeks since the miscarriage, and Zendaya needed something to tend that wouldn't leave her. The roses, thorny and difficult and demanding of patience, seemed like perfect companions for her grief. She started with the climbers, their vines twisted into knots of confusion against the garden wall. Each cut felt like a small act of rebellion against chaos. She found herself talking to them the way her grandmother had taught her. "You've been left too long," she murmured to a particularly tangled vine. "But that doesn't mean you're beyond saving. We just need to remember which way the sun rises." Charles found her there in the afternoon, dirt under her nails, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cool spring air. He stopped at the garden's edge, something unreadable crossing his face. "I haven't seen anyone in that garden for 5 years," he said softly. "I hope you don't mind. They needed you." He stepped closer, examining her work. "You've done this before." "My grandmother had a garden in Georgia. Nothing fancy like this, but she taught me that plants are like people. They need structure to grow, but freedom to bloom." Isabel said something similar. She said gardens teach us that beauty requires both discipline and wildness. They worked in companionable silence after that, Charles fetching tools and water while Zendaya shaped and pruned. By sunset, a small section of the garden looked loved again, and something in Zendaya's chest felt marginally less broken. This became their routine. Every morning, Zendaya would take her coffee to the garden, and Charles would find reasons to join her. He learned the names she gave each rose bush: Survivor, Phoenix, Second Chance. She learned that he knew more about gardening than he pretended, had helped Isabel plant half of these roses during their first year of marriage. "Why did you stop?" she asked one morning, watching him expertly deadhead a climbing rose. "Because it hurt too much to see them bloom without her. But watching you bring them back, it's like watching her love become visible again." It was during the 3rd week of this routine that William Ashford arrived. Zendaya heard the car before she saw it, a Porsche engine purring with the particular arrogance of expensive machinery. She was deep in the rosebed, replanting a bush that had been choked by weeds when footsteps approached. "Charles, we need to talk about the Singapore deal." The voice stopped abruptly. She looked up to find a man in a $1,000 suit staring at her with undisguised surprise. His eyes travelled from her dirt-covered hands to her hair, wrapped in one of Cordelia's scarves, to her skin that gleamed with sweat and sun. "The help works on Sunday now." William Ashford's voice carried the particular tone of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Zendaya straightened slowly, very aware of the pruning shears in her hand. "I'm not Mr. Ashford." Charles's voice cut through the garden like winter wind. He stood in the doorway, and Zendaya had never seen him truly angry before. His face was calm, but his eyes were arctic. "This is Zendaya Juliet, my houseguest and friend." William's face went through several expressions: surprise, calculation, then something uglier. "Your friend?" William's eyes narrowed, calculating. "Charles, you can't be serious. After everything with Isabel, you're... What? Playing savior to someone who clearly doesn't belong in this world?" "Careful," Charles said, stepping into the garden, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. "Your next words will determine whether we continue doing business together." William laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "You'd throw away a $50 million deal over some woman you found? She's obviously working you, Charles. They always do. Showing up with their sob stories, their big eyes, making good men like you think you need to rescue them. Over someone I respect more than I've ever respected you? Yes, without hesitation." The silence stretched taut. Zendaya found herself holding her breath, torn between wanting to disappear and wanting to stand taller. "You've lost your mind," William said finally. "First you lock yourself away for 5 years, now you're playing rescue mission to... what? Feel better about yourself. She's using you, Charles. They always do." "They?" Zendaya spoke before she could stop herself. "Who exactly is they, Mr. Ashford?" William turned to her, his lip curling. "Women like you, looking for a meal ticket, showing up with sob stories and big eyes, making good men think, that's enough." Charles moved between them, his body a wall between William's words and Zendaya's heart. "Get off my property. Our business relationship is terminated, effective immediately." "You're making a mistake," William snarled. "When she shows her true colors, when she takes you for everything, the only person who's taken anything from me is you. You've taken my patience, my tolerance, and now my respect. Leave. Now, or I'll have security escort you out." William left, his Porsche engine roaring with the same anger he couldn't express in words. Charles stood rigid until the sound faded, then turned to Zendaya with eyes full of remorse. "I'm so sorry. William he's not representative of your world," Zendaya finished. "Yes, he is. He's probably what most of your colleagues think when they see me here, the black woman living in the white millionaire's house. They all think they know the story. Then they're all wrong." "Are they? I am living off your charity. I am a sob story with big eyes. Maybe William just said what everyone else is thinking." Charles stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixing with the scent of roses. "Do you know what I see when I look at you? A replacement for your wife?" The words came out harsher than intended. "No." His voice was firm. "I see someone who's survived betrayal that would break most people. I see hands that bring dead things back to life. I see strength that doesn't need to announce itself. I see a woman who lost everything and still helps other women avoid the same fate. I see courage and grace and a kind of beauty that has nothing to do with surfaces. Charles, I just lost $50 million and I'd do it again. I'd lose every business partner I have before I'd let anyone speak to you that way." The sun was setting, painting the garden gold, and Zendaya found herself swaying toward him like the roses leaned toward light. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a smudge of dirt, and she felt more seen than she had in her entire marriage to Lambert. "This is dangerous," she whispered. Everything worth doing is. They were close enough to share breath, close enough that she could see flecks of green in his blue eyes, close enough that one small movement would change everything. The moment stretched, heavy with possibility. Then her phone rang, her mother's ringtone, shattering the spell. They stepped apart, both breathing a little too fast. Zendaya answered the phone with trembling hands. "Baby girl, I've been worried. You haven't called in days." "I'm sorry, Mama. I've been gardening." Grace Juliet's laugh was warm across the miles. "Your grandmother's spirit is strong in you. Are you healing?" Zendaya looked at Charles, who was pretending to examine a rose bush while clearly listening. "I'm trying. And that man whose house you're staying in? Is he treating you right? He just lost $50 million defending me to a business partner." A pause. "That sounds like a story I need to hear." So Zendaya told her, Charles finally giving up his pretense and sitting on a garden bench while she talked. Grace listened, made appropriate sounds of outrage about William Ashford, and then said something that made Zendaya's heart stop. "Sounds like somebody's falling in love." "Mama, no. It's too soon. I'm still... Lambert was never love, baby girl. He was performance. This sounds different. It's complicated. The best things always are. Your father and I were complicated too. Him a minister, me a blues singer in a juke joint. But real love finds a way through complicated." After the call, Zendaya and Charles sat in the garden as darkness fell, neither mentioning the almost kiss, but both achingly aware of it. "Your mother sounds wise," Charles said finally. "She thinks I should trust again." "What do you think?" Zendaya looked at the roses they'd been tending together, some still struggling but showing new growth, reaching toward tomorrow despite yesterday's neglect. "I think trust is like gardening. You plant something and hope it grows, knowing that storms might come, that despite your best efforts, things might die. But you plant anyway because the alternative is a world without flowers. Is that what we're doing? Planting something?" "I don't know what we're doing," she admitted. "I know you make me feel safe. I know you see me as more than Lambert's victim. I know that when you look at me, I remember who I was before him, who I could be after him." "That's enough for now," Charles said. "We don't need to know what we're planting. We just need to tend it and see what grows." The next morning, Zendaya found a delivery at the garden gate, hundreds of roses, all different varieties, with a note from Charles. "For new beginnings. Plant them wherever feels right." She spent the day placing them throughout the garden, each bush a small act of faith in the future. Charles joined her in the afternoon, and they worked until sunset, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed tools, each touch electric with possibility. William Ashford called 3 times. Charles didn't answer. When Theodore called with news that more Singapore investors were interested, Charles told him to pursue it. "But only with partners who understand that respect isn't negotiable," he said, looking at Zendaya as he spoke. That night, as she stood at her window watching Charles's silhouette in his study, Zendaya felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Not for romance, not yet. She wasn't ready for that. But hope that she could be someone other than the abandoned wife. Hope that this garden, these roses, this complicated something growing between her and Charles might bloom into whatever it was meant to be. In the garden below, the gardenias released their perfume into the night air, and Zendaya could almost hear her grandmother's voice. "Baby girl, the best gardens grow from ground that's been broken. That's how the light gets in." Tomorrow, she would plant more roses. Tomorrow, she would call Patricia in Seattle about building their case against Lambert. Tomorrow, she would take another step toward whoever she was becoming. But tonight, she simply stood at her window, watching over a garden that was teaching her to bloom again, and a man who was learning the same lesson, one rose at a time. Chapter 7. The Letters. Grace Juliet arrived on Thursday afternoon like a force of nature wrapped in purple silk and righteous determination, her presence filling Charles Lincoln's estate with lavender perfume and gospel humming. "Where is my baby girl?" she announced to Cordelia at the door, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd raised 3 children and buried a husband without losing faith. Zendaya heard her from the garden and came running, not caring about the soil covering her. She threw herself into Grace's arms like she was 8 years old again. "Let me look at you," Grace said, holding Zendaya at arm's length. Her eyes took in everything, the weight loss, the shadows, but also something new. "You're different, stronger." "Mama, Pain will do that if you let it forge instead of break you." Charles appeared in the doorway, having heard the commotion. He'd clearly rushed to make himself presentable, tie slightly crooked, hair hastily smoothed. Grace studied him with the intensity of someone who'd spent 40 years reading souls through faces. "So you're the man who took in my daughter. Mrs. Juliet, it's an honor. Zendaya speaks of you constantly. Does she now? And what does she say? That you're the strongest woman she knows, that you taught her everything about resilience, that your cornbread could make angels weep." Grace laughed, rich and full. The boy knows flattery. That's dangerous in a rich man. "Mama," Zendaya warned. "What? Money and charm together can be powerful. Your father had charm but no money. Lambert had money but no real charm, just tricks. This one appears to have both. I assure you, Mrs. Juliet, my intentions toward your daughter are entirely honorable." "Oh, I'm not worried about your intentions, Mr. Lincoln. I'm curious about your feelings." The silence was deafening. Zendaya felt heat rise to her cheeks while Charles seemed to be searching for words. "Why don't I show you to your room, Mama?" Zendaya said quickly. But Grace wasn't done. She walked through the foyer, taking in the photographs of Charles and Isabel. She stopped at their wedding photo. She was beautiful. You can see the real love, not the performed kind. "She was extraordinary," Charles agreed. "And now you're helping my daughter heal from someone who was the opposite." Grace turned to face him. "Why?" "Because she needed help. Because I had space. Because sometimes the universe puts people in our path who change us just by existing." Grace nodded slowly. Verdict reached. "Show me this garden my daughter's been resurrecting." They walked through the French doors, and Grace gasped at the transformation. "Child, this is magnificent. Your grandmother's spirit is all over this." Charles helped. "We've been working together." "I can see that." Grace's knowing look said she saw much more. They were settling into tea when Cordelia appeared, troubled. "Mr. Charles, there's a courier. Says Mrs. Bean needs to sign personally." The envelope was thick, legal-sized, from a Miami law firm. Zendaya signed with trembling hands. "Divorce papers," she said, scanning the documents. Then her voice sharpened. "He's demanding alimony and half my inheritance from my grandmother. He says I abandoned the marriage. He wants $250,000 or he'll contest." "That snake," Grace hissed. "He can't do this," Charles said, already calling. "The marriage wasn't legal." "But he knows I just want this over," Zendaya said. "He knows I'll pay to make him go away." "You will do no such thing," Grace said firmly. "You don't pay the devil to leave. You send him back to hell." Charles was on the phone with his lawyer. "Benjamin, I need you here immediately." Benjamin Cross arrived within an hour, silver temples and hawk eyes. He reviewed the papers with disgust. "This is legal harassment. He has no grounds. The marriage was fraudulent. If anything, you could sue him." "I don't want his money," Zendaya said. "I just want him gone." "Then we counteroffer." Benjamin said. We respond with evidence of his bigamy, embezzlement, fraud. We make clear that if he pursues this, we pursue criminal charges. Do it, Charles said. It's not your decision, Zendaya said quietly. Everyone turned to her. I appreciate everything, but this is my marriage, my divorce, my choice. I need to fight this myself. You don't have to fight alone, Charles said. No, but I need to be the one fighting, not being rescued. She turned to Benjamin. Write the response. Make it clear I know everything about Scarlett, the embezzlement, Seattle. Tell him I have evidence. Tell him the only thing I'll give him is silence, and only if he signs with no conditions. Benjamin nodded. That's brilliant. You're offering what he needs most, the ability to keep running his con. For now, once I'm legally free, then we pursue justice. But first, I need to not be his wife anymore. As Benjamin worked, Grace pulled Zendaya aside. You're different, not just stronger, smarter, strategic. I learned from the best. You learned from yourself. This is who you always were. Lambert just made you forget. That evening, they all sat around the dining table working on the response. When Charles's hand brushed Zendaya's reaching for the same paper, they both froze, electricity passing between them. Grace, watching, smiled knowingly. Mr. Lincoln, tell me about your business. Charles, grateful for distraction, explained his import-export empire, while Zendaya tried to focus on legal documents instead of the warmth where he'd touched her. Must be lonely, Grace said. All that traveling, coming home to this big house. It has been. Less so recently. Mama, Zendaya warned. What? So, Charles, may I call you Charles? What are your intentions toward my daughter? Mama, it's a fair question. You've opened your home, defended her to business partners, paying for lawyers. That's either sainthood or something else. Charles met Grace's eyes directly. My intention is to help your daughter reclaim her life, to provide safety while she heals, to be whatever she needs, friend, support, or quiet presence. Anything beyond that is her choice, in her time. And if she chooses more, then I'd be honored. But that's a conversation for when she's legally and emotionally free. Grace nodded. You'll do. Mama, please. Hush, child. Your mama knows quality. This one's nothing like Lambert. Lambert was performance all the way down. This one's solid. Benjamin cleared his throat. The response is ready. Zendaya read through it, hands steady. It was perfect, professional but devastating, making clear she held all the cards. Send it, she said. As Benjamin prepared to leave, he pulled Charles aside, but Zendaya could hear. The embezzlement case is moving forward. The FBI is involved. They'll want to talk to Mrs. Bean within the week. When? They're building a federal case. Lambert crossed state lines in his fraud. Zendaya felt satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. Justice was coming, but it would demand more. Testimony, reliving humiliation, facing truth publicly. That night, after Benjamin left and Grace retired, Zendaya found Charles in his study staring at documents. The Singapore deal? She asked. William's been calling partners, trying to turn them against the new deal. I'm sorry, this is my fault. No, William showed his true character. I'd rather lose every deal than work with someone who thinks like him. That's noble, but not practical. Sometimes nobility is the most practical choice. She moved closer, looking at the papers showing losses since William's departure. You're losing money because of me. I'm losing money because I chose principles over profit. Charles, she didn't know what to say. Don't apologize for my choices. I haven't felt this clear about anything since Isabel died. Helping you has given me purpose again. Their hands were on the desk, inches apart. Slowly, Zendaya moved hers until their fingers touched. Not holding, just connecting. My mother likes you. Your mother is terrifying. She's protective. She wants to know my intentions. So do I, Zendaya admitted. Not now. Not while I'm still legally tied to him. But someday, Charles agreed, fingers gently intertwining with hers. When you're ready, when you're free, when you know it's real, and not just gratitude or proximity. What if it's all of those things plus something more? Then we'll figure it out together, the way we figured out the garden. They stood there, hands barely touching over legal documents that would free her from one man while she considered the possibility of another. Not as replacement or rescue, but as choice made by a woman learning to trust her judgment again. I should check on Mama, Zendaya said finally. She's probably listening at the door, Charles said with a smile. I heard that. Grace's voice called from the hallway, making them both laugh. As Zendaya left, she felt the ghost of Charles's touch on her hand, a promise of possibilities that would wait until she was ready. Tomorrow would bring Lambert's response, the FBI, another step toward freedom. But tonight, she had her mother in the house, a good man's hand to hold, and hope blooming in her chest like the gardenias that had learned to thrive in unlikely soil. Chapter 8. The Storm. The hurricane arrived with a name like a southern belle, Amelia, but her temperament was pure fury, turning the sky the color of old bruises and sending wind that screamed accusations against the windows. This is biblical, Grace said, watching the trees bend like supplicants from the safety of Charles's living room. The Lord's got something to say tonight. Zendaya stood at the French doors, mesmerized by the garden's transformation. Her carefully tended roses whipped wildly, petals torn away like love letters scattered to the wind. The gardenias for faith held on, stubborn in their blooming even as the storm tried to tear them from the earth. We should move away from the windows, Charles said, but he didn't move either, standing close enough to Zendaya that she could feel his warmth without touching. The power went first, plunging the estate into darkness that felt alive, breathing with the storm's rhythm. Cordelia appeared with candles, her face eerily beautiful in the flickering light. The generator will kick in soon, she said, but even as she spoke, they heard it sputter and die, drowned by the hurricane's voice. So much for modern convenience, Charles muttered, helping distribute candles throughout the room. They settled in the living room, Grace on the sofa with her Bible, Cordelia knitting by candlelight with practiced ease, Charles and Zendaya unconsciously gravitating toward each other like planets finding orbit. Might as well be 1925 instead of 2025, Grace said, her voice carrying the storytelling cadence of someone who'd weathered storms before. Your daddy and I got caught in a hurricane once, before you were born, Zendaya. No power for 5 days. That's when he proposed. In a hurricane? Zendaya asked, grateful for distraction from the wind's violence. Said he realized if the world was ending, I was the person he wanted beside him. Got down on one knee right there in my mama's kitchen, candlelight making everything golden, and asked if I'd weather all of life's storms with him. That's beautiful, Cordelia said softly. That's smart, Grace corrected. Man knew I couldn't run away in a hurricane, had to give him an answer. They laughed, but the sound was swallowed by thunder that shook the house to its bones. In the distance, something crashed, a tree falling perhaps, or parts of the world being rearranged by wind's wild hands. Charles disappeared into his study, returning with something Zendaya hadn't expected. A guitar. You play? She asked. Isabel made me learn, said every house needed music, especially during storms. He settled into a chair, tuning the instrument with practiced fingers. Any requests? Amazing Grace, Grace said immediately. Seems appropriate. Charles began to play, his voice joining the melody, not perfect, but real, warm, filling the candlelit room with something stronger than storm. Grace began to sing harmony, her voice seasoned by years of church choirs. Even Cordelia hummed along. Zendaya closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For a moment, she could forget everything: Lambert's betrayal, the FBI investigation looming, the feelings for Charles she wasn't ready to name. There was just this: voices raised against the storm, light pushing back darkness, the strange family they'd become. When the song ended, the storm seemed quieter, as if listening. "Your turn," Charles said, offering Zendaya the guitar. "I don't play. But you sing. I've heard you in the garden when you think no one's listening." Heat rose to her cheeks. "That's different." "Baby girl's got her daddy's voice," Grace said. "Could make angels weep and sinners repent." "Mama, sing 'His Eye is on the Sparrow.' You know that was your daddy's favorite." Zendaya couldn't refuse her mother. She began softly, her voice growing stronger as the familiar words came back. "Why should I feel discouraged? Why should the shadows come?" Her voice filled the room, rich and deep, carrying pain transformed into beauty. Charles watched her with an expression that made her heart stutter, something beyond admiration, approaching reverence. When she finished, the room was silent except for the storm's fury outside. "That was—" Charles started, then stopped, apparently finding no adequate words. "That was your daddy's spirit coming through," Grace said, wiping her eyes. "He always said God gave you that voice for a reason." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the storm creating a strange intimacy. Here in the candlelight, with the world torn apart outside, nothing existed but this room, these people, this moment. "I need to check the windows upstairs," Charles said eventually. "Make sure nothing's broken." "I'll help," Zendaya offered, standing before she could second-guess herself. They climbed the stairs together, each carrying a candle, shadows dancing on the walls like memories trying to take shape. The first room was Charles's, masculine, organized, but with touches of softness. A photo of Isabel on the nightstand, her robe still hanging on the bathroom door. "5 years and you haven't changed anything," Zendaya observed. "Haven't needed to, until recently." They moved to check the windows, secure against the storm, then to the guest rooms, one by one, a strange domestic ritual that felt both innocent and charged with possibility. In the last room, the one that had been meant as a nursery, painted soft yellow with stars on the ceiling, they found a window that had cracked, rain beginning to seep through. "We need to board this up," Charles said, but neither of them moved, standing in what would have been a child's room, surrounded by unrealized dreams. "Do you ever wonder who you'd be if things had been different?" Zendaya asked softly. "If Isabel had lived? If the babies had survived?" "Every day, but lately." He turned to her, his face half in shadow, half in candlelight. "Lately I wonder who I'd be if you hadn't come here, if Lambert hadn't abandoned you at my door, if I'd never learned what it felt like to care about someone again." "Charles, I know. Too soon. You're not ready. But this storm makes me think about time, how we assume we have so much of it." He moved closer, not touching, just near. "Isabel and I thought we had forever. You thought Lambert was forever. Nothing's guaranteed except this moment." The wind howled, the house shuddered, and Zendaya found herself swaying toward him like the roses toward sun. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of the storm, of feeling something real again, of trusting my judgment, of wanting something I might lose. That's not fear, that's wisdom." His hand came up to cup her face, gentle as breath. "But sometimes we have to choose between wisdom and possibility." They stood there, poised on the edge of something, the storm giving them permission to be reckless, to be brave, to be foolish. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she felt herself melting, all her careful walls washing away like sandcastles in rain. "If I kiss you now," he whispered, his breath warm against her lips, "it changes everything." This won't be grief seeking comfort or loneliness finding company. This will be us choosing each other. Everything's already changed. The moment you didn't let me leave that first night, the moment you saw me as more than his victim, the moment you held me while I lost faith. Not like this. This would be a choice, not a circumstance. This would be us deciding to risk everything we've rebuilt on the possibility of something more. She rose on her toes and silenced him with her lips, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as he responded with a hunger that surprised them both. He tasted like coffee and possibility, like safety and danger wrapped in one. His arms came around her, pulling her closer, and she felt herself disappearing into something larger than her own pain, her own fear. When they pulled apart, both breathing hard, the storm seemed quieter. "That was," he started. "Don't analyze it," she said quickly. "Don't make it mean more than it means. Just let it be what it was." What was it? A kiss during a hurricane, a moment outside of time, a possibility, not a promise. He nodded, understanding her need to keep it contained, defined, safe. "We should board up this window." They worked together in comfortable silence, their bodies aware of each other in a new way, careful not to touch again, knowing that another kiss might break something open that neither was ready to handle. When they returned downstairs, Grace took one look at them and smiled knowingly, but said nothing. Cordelia had fallen asleep in her chair, and Grace was reading her Bible by candlelight. "Storms passing," Grace observed, nodding toward the windows where the wind had indeed begun to quiet, the howling softening to whispers. Charles found an old radio, battery-powered and dust-covered, managing to tune in a weather report through static. The hurricane was moving out to sea, leaving destruction in its wake, but also that strange, sacred peace that follows survival. "I should check the garden," Zendaya said. "It'll be there in the morning," Charles said. "Whatever's damaged we'll fix together." The word "together" hung between them, weighted with new meaning after their kiss, but also comfortable, right? They sat up until dawn, Grace telling stories of Zendaya's childhood, Charles sharing memories of Isabel, Cordelia waking to add her own tales of the Lincoln family history. When the first light broke through the clouds, painting the world gold and green and rain-washed clean, they were still there, still talking, still choosing to be family in all the ways that mattered. Outside, the garden was devastated but not destroyed. Roses lay scattered like confetti after a wedding, but the roots held strong. The gardenias for Faith had survived, battered but blooming, proof that some things endure even the strongest storms. "We'll replant," Charles said, standing beside Zendaya as they surveyed the damage. "We will," she agreed, and they both knew they were talking about more than roses. Behind them, Grace watched from the window, her prayers answered in ways she hadn't expected. Her daughter had been broken, yes, but she was being rebuilt by good hands, patient hearts, and the kind of love that grows slowly, carefully, like roses after storms. The phone rang. Power had been restored, sharp and demanding in the morning quiet. Charles answered, his face darkening as he listened. "I understand," he said finally. "Yes, she's here. We'll handle it." He hung up, turning to Zendaya with an expression that made her stomach drop. "That was Theodore. Lambert's back. He's at the gates, demanding to see you, and he's not alone." Chapter 9. The Confrontation. Lambert stood at the gates like a bad memory made flesh, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect smile cracked, and beside him, God help them all, stood Scarlet Bridges, pregnant and beautiful and utterly confused. "Open the gates," Zendaya said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. "Absolutely not," Charles said. "We call the police. Number I need to face him, and she needs to hear the truth." Grace stepped forward, her presence a shield. "Then you don't face him alone." They walked to the gates together, Zendaya, Charles, Grace, even Cordelia, who refused to be left behind. Theodore had arrived minutes earlier with security footage and documents. The small army of support should have made Zendaya feel stronger, but seeing Lambert's face, that face she'd kissed goodbye 3 months ago, made her feel 17 and foolish again. "Hello, wife," Lambert said through the bars, his voice carrying practiced charm that now sounded like nails on glass. "I'm not your wife. I never was." Technically true. He smiled that salesman's smile. "This is Scarlett, my actual wife. Scarlett meet Zendaya, my charity case." Scarlett's blue eyes were wide, confused, one hand protective over her swollen belly. "I don't understand. You said she was a student you were mentoring." "He's lying," Zendaya said gently. "I have proof." "Don't listen to her," Lambert cut in. "She's unbalanced. That's why Mr. Lincoln took her in. Isn't that right, Charles?" Charles stepped forward, rage quiet and controlled. "The only broken thing here is your ability to tell the truth." "Truth?" Lambert laughed. "Here's truth. I found Zendaya at her father's funeral, desperate for attention. It was supposed to be quick, her inheritance. But she was so needy, so pathetic, I felt sorry for her." "Stop." Zendaya pulled out her phone, showing the wedding video. "This is our wedding. Legal documents, photos, witnesses." She held the phone up to the gate. Scarlett's face drained of color. "That's the suit I bought you for our anniversary," Scarlett whispered. "Baby, she's doctored these." "The marriage certificate is registered in Georgia," Theodore said, stepping forward. "March 15th, 2023, 3 days after your youngest son was born." The name hit Lambert like a slap. His mask slipped. "You were at a conference," Scarlett said, voice hollow. "In Atlanta." "I was on my honeymoon," Zendaya said gently. "He left me alone for 3 days. Said he had an emergency. That must have been you calling about the baby." Scarlett's legs gave out. Charles was through the gate instantly, catching her, guiding her to a bench. "Don't touch her," Lambert snarled. "Funny how you remember that now," Grace said, voice sharp enough to cut. "Your daughter was a mark," Lambert spat, all pretense abandoned. "A lonely preacher's daughter with a dead daddy and life insurance. She practically had victim stamped on her forehead." The slap came from Scarlett. She'd risen from the bench, fury giving her strength, and her palm connected with Lambert's cheek hard enough to snap his head sideways. "3 children," she said, voice breaking. "I'm carrying your 4th. And all of it was a lie. Scarlett, baby, don't." She turned to Zendaya, tears streaming. "How long?" 18 months. But he was only there half the time. Business trips. Home. He was coming home to us." Scarlett laughed, broken glass. "The cologne changes. The unexplained money. I thought he was getting promotions." "The money was from embezzlement," Theodore said. "The FBI has a warrant." Lambert's face went white. "You can't prove—" "Actually, we can." Charles showed security footage on his phone. "This is you, 3 months ago, taking items from my office. You set me up. You set yourself up when you brought Zendaya here and abandoned her." Lambert turned on Zendaya, eyes wild. "This is your fault. You couldn't just accept it was over. You ruined everything the day you decided we were things to use instead of people to love," Zendaya said, finding her strength. "But you made one mistake. You left me with good people. People who showed me what real love looks like." She moved closer to the gate. "You want the truth? I'm grateful you showed your true colors. Because here I found my strength again. Here I remembered who I was before you tried to make me small. You were nothing before me. I was a minister's daughter, a teacher, a gardener, a woman with dreams and faith and a voice. You didn't make me special. You tried to make me dependent, but that's over now." Sirens sounded, growing closer. Lambert's eyes darted, calculating. "Scarlett, we need to go." But Scarlett was staring at Zendaya with recognition. He did the same thing. My father's funeral, the comfort, the quick wedding. It's what he does, Zendaya said. Finds women in grief, offers escape, then traps them. The FBI is 2 minutes out, Theodore said. Lambert grabbed Scarlett's arm. We're leaving. No, she pulled away. I'm done believing, done following, done pretending I don't see what's right in front of me. You're my wife. So was she. Scarlett pointed at Zendaya. So is someone in Seattle. How many wives do you have? How many families? The FBI vehicles pulled up. The lead agent, a woman with steel-gray hair, approached. Lawrence Bridges, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and bigamy. Lambert tried to run. Pathetic, really. Where did he think he would go? Charles's security had sealed the exits. He made it 20 feet before agents brought him down onto the manicured lawn where Zendaya had stood that first night. As they cuffed him, Lambert looked back at both women. You've ruined me, he snarled. No, Zendaya said quietly. You ruined yourself. We're just refusing to play our parts anymore. They led him away, his last words neither apology nor explanation, but complaint. I want my lawyer. He was nobody, just a man who'd built a house of cards on other people's pain. Scarlett collapsed into tears. Zendaya knelt beside her, this woman who should have been her enemy but was instead her sister in survival. What am I going to do? 4 children. No money. It was all stolen. You'll survive, Zendaya said firmly, the same way I did, with help. She looked up at Charles, a question in her eyes. He nodded immediately. The West Wing has a full apartment. You and your children can stay as long as you need. I couldn't. Yes, you can, Grace interrupted. That's what good people do. Scarlett looked between them, these strangers offering sanctuary, and cried harder. Why would you help me? I'm carrying his child. That child didn't choose its father, Zendaya said, remembering Faith. And neither did you. We were all victims, but we don't have to stay victims. Theodore cleared his throat. The FBI will need statements, but that can wait. Right now, Mrs. Bridges, you need medical attention. Charles was already calling doctor. Lawson, while Cordelia prepared the West Wing. Grace helped Scarlett to her feet. Come on, honey, let's get you inside. As they walked toward the house, this strange procession of wounded women and protective hearts, Zendaya looked back at the empty gates. She felt free. You were magnificent, Charles said quietly. I was honest. Same thing, in a world full of Lamberts. She took his hand, not caring who saw. Thank you. For everything. You were never invisible, just temporarily eclipsed. That night, they all sat together, Zendaya, Charles, Grace, Cordelia, and Scarlett, with her 3 children brought from Miami by the FBI. The children didn't understand why Daddy wasn't coming home. It's like a hurricane, the eldest boy said solemnly. Daddy's gone like the trees that fell. But we're still here, Scarlett said, holding him. We're still standing. And we'll replant, Zendaya added, thinking of her garden, of Charles's hand in hers. We'll grow something new. The children went to bed, Scarlett went to rest, and the others sat in the living room where they'd weathered the storm. He'll go to prison, Theodore said. 5 to 10 years minimum. Good, Zendaya said, then surprised herself. But that's not enough. What do you mean? She stood, pacing to the window. He'll get out. He'll do this again, unless ... Unless what? Charles asked. She turned to face them, something new in her eyes, not just survival, but purpose. Unless we make sure everyone knows who he is. Unless we make him infamous for being a predator instead of successful for being charming. A campaign, Grace said, understanding. A foundation, Charles added, for women who've been conned. Justice, Zendaya said. Real justice. Not just legal consequences, but social ones. They all nodded, and in that moment, something shifted. The story was no longer about what Lambert had done, but what they would do in response. Not victims, but warriors. Tomorrow would bring FBI interviews. Tomorrow would bring Scarlett's baby arriving early from stress. Tomorrow would bring challenges they couldn't imagine. But tonight, they were family forged by strange circumstances. Tonight, they were planning victory from the ashes of defeat. And Lambert, sitting in federal holding, had no idea that the women he'd dismissed as weak were about to become his legacy, not as victims, but as the ones who finally stopped him. Chapter 10. The Justice and the Choice. 6 months later, Zendaya stood in a federal courthouse wearing the same emerald dress she'd worn the night Lambert abandoned her, now tailored to fit her stronger frame, her presence no longer diminished, but commanding. "State your name for the record," the prosecutor said. "Zendaya Juliet, not Bean, never really Bean." From the defendant's table, Lambert looked smaller than she remembered, his orange jumpsuit replacing designer suits, his silver tongue finally silenced by the weight of evidence. Beside her in the gallery, Scarlett sat with baby Grace. Yes, she'd named her daughter after Zendaya's mother, sleeping in her arms. "Tell us about the night of March 10th, the prosecutor continued. Zendaya spoke clearly, every word a nail in the coffin of Lambert's fabricated life. She told them about the abandonment, the bigamy, the calculated cruelty of targeting grieving women. She didn't cry. She'd done her crying in the garden with Charles, in the kitchen with Cordelia, in her mother's arms. Now she was steel. Lambert's lawyer tried to paint her as vindictive, jealous, a woman scorned, but Zendaya had receipts, literal and metaphorical. Theodore had been thorough. Every lie Lambert told was countered with evidence. When Scarlett testified, holding Grace while her 3 boys watched from the custody of their grandmother, the jury's faces told the story. Lambert wasn't a smooth criminal. He was a predator who'd finally been caught. The verdict came back in 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Wire fraud, embezzlement, bigamy, theft. 10 years federal prison, no possibility of early release for 5. Lambert's parents, Harrison and Margaret Bean, approached Zendaya outside the courthouse, their faces aged a decade in 6 months. "We're sorry," Margaret whispered, tears streaming. "We raised him better than this. We don't understand how he became. Sometimes people choose to be cruel," Zendaya said gently. "It's not your fault." Harrison cleared his throat. "We want to make amends. The family business, Bean Logistics, we're selling it. The proceeds will go to his victims." "Actually," Zendaya said, a plan she'd been nurturing for months finally blooming, "I'd like to buy it." Everyone turned to stare. Charles, who'd stood silent support throughout the trial. Grace, who'd moved to the estate permanently to help with Scarlett's children. Even Theodore looked surprised. "I have my inheritance from grandmother. The house sold for more than expected, and Charles has offered to invest as a silent partner." She looked at Charles, who nodded encouragement. "I want to turn Bean Logistics into something else, a non-profit, moving services for women escaping domestic abuse, free relocation for women starting over. We'll call it Faith Forward." Margaret Bean was crying harder now, but she was nodding. Yes, make something good from our failure. The sale was finalized within the month. Lambert, from his federal cell, tried to contest it, but he had no legal standing. The business he'd used as a cover for his crimes became an instrument of redemption. The garden wedding happened on a Thursday, because Zendaya said Thursdays were for new beginnings, not endings. Only 20 people attended, their strange, beautiful, chosen family. Scarlett was her maid of honor, because who else could understand the journey from Lambert's victim to her own victory? The 3 boys were ring-bearers. Baby Grace in Grace Senior's arms was the flower girl by proxy, spreading petals with her grandmother's help. Charles stood at the altar they'd built among the roses, his eyes never leaving Zendaya as she walked toward him alone. No one to give her away because she was giving herself, freely, fully, finally. She wore her grandmother's wedding dress, altered and updated but carrying history. The gardenias for faith were in her bouquet, their scent a reminder that beauty could grow from loss. "Before we begin," Grace said, for she was officiating, having gotten ordained just for this moment, "Charles has something to say." Charles pulled out a worn journal, Isabel's last one. "My late wife wrote this the week before she died," he read, his voice steady but full. "To the woman who will love Charles after I'm gone. Thank you. Thank you for seeing past his grief to his goodness. Thank you for teaching him that love isn't betrayal of the dead, but honor to life. Thank you for being brave enough to risk after loss. I pray you know that you have not just my permission but my blessing. Love him fully. He deserves nothing less, and so do you." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden, but Zendaya smiled through her tears. She knew. She always knew, Charles agreed. The vows were simple, honest, real. "Zendaya," Charles said, "you arrived at my door broken but not defeated. You taught me that helping someone heal could heal me too. You brought music back to this house, life back to this garden, and love back to this heart I thought was done feeling. I promise to see you, support you, and stand beside you through whatever storms come. I promise to tend our garden, literal and metaphorical, with patience and hope. I promise to love you not in spite of your past, but because your past made you exactly who you are, strong, compassionate, unbreakable." "Charles," Zendaya replied, "you gave me sanctuary when I needed shelter, respect when I expected pity, and space when I needed to remember who I was. You showed me that real love doesn't diminish but amplifies, doesn't confine but frees. I promise to match your trust with truth, your patience with partnership, your love with love that's been tested by fire and chosen anyway. I promise to fill this house with music and laughter and probably too many rescue plants. I promise to love you not as a replacement or a refuge, but as my choice, my partner, my unexpected gift from a God who works in mysterious ways." "By the power vested in me by the state and by the Lord above," Grace announced, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Charles, kiss your bride like you mean it." He did. The kiss was everything their hurricane kiss had promised. Passion and tenderness, history and future, two souls choosing to build something from the ruins of what they'd lost. The reception was in the garden, under lights strung like stars. Patricia from Seattle had come, now running her own tech company and funding Faith Forward's West Coast operations. Even William Ashford had sent a gift, a note of apology and a check for the charity, his prejudice apparently expensive enough to overcome. "A toast," Theodore stood, raising his glass, "to Zendaya, who turned victimhood into victory, to Charles, who remembered how to love, to Scarlett, who chose truth over comfort, to Grace, who raised a warrior, and to Lambert, may his prison cell be everything he deserves. To justice served warm," Grace added, making everyone laugh. As the evening wound down, Zendaya stood with Charles looking over their garden, damaged, replanted, blooming wild and beautiful. "Any regrets?" he asked. "One. I wish Faith could have been here. She is. Every gardenia that blooms, every woman we help escape, every time we choose love over fear, she's here." Scarlett approached with baby Grace reaching for Zendaya. "The FBI called. Lambert tried to contact me, wants to see his daughter." "What did you say?" "That his daughter will know exactly who her father is, a cautionary tale, and exactly who her family is, the people who chose to love her." "Speaking of family," Charles said, pulling out an envelope, "this came today." Inside was a deed. Charles had bought Lambert's parents' house. They were downsizing, couldn't bear the memories, and turned it into the first Faith Forward shelter. "The first family moves in next week," he said, "a woman from Alabama. Her husband reminds me of Lambert. Then she'll have what we all needed, Zendaya said, a safe place to remember who she is. As the moon rose over the estate, Zendaya danced with her husband, her real, legal, chosen husband, while her mother sang an old spiritual about redemption. Scarlett's children played in the garden, their laughter erasing the shadow their father had cast. Baby Grace slept in her mother's arms, innocent of the complicated story that brought her here. And somewhere in federal prison, Lambert sat alone, his charm useless against concrete walls, while the women he'd tried to break built an empire of recovery from the ashes he'd left behind. "Thank you," Zendaya whispered to Charles as they swayed to music only they could hear, the band having stopped playing to watch them, everyone understanding this was a moment too sacred for accompaniment. "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself." "Thank you," he replied, pulling her closer, "for reminding me that broken doesn't mean ended, that love isn't singular, that hearts can grow larger, from loss instead of smaller." They kissed as rose petals fell, Cordelia and the children throwing them from baskets with joy that erased shadows, and the garden bloomed around them, proof that the right love at the right time could resurrect anything, even hearts that had given up on spring, even faith that had been buried with a baby who never breathed, even trust that had been shattered by a man who never existed. And somewhere in federal prison, Lambert sat in solitary confinement. He'd tried to con other inmates within his first week, while the women he'd tried to destroy built an empire of recovery. Faith Forward would help relocate over 300 women in its first year. His legacy wasn't the pain he caused, but the movement he inadvertently started. Broken women refusing to stay broken, choosing to bloom like gardenias in unlikely soil, proving that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's transformation.